I'd like to welcome everyone to the first diversity film, which was No Way Out. Hopefully, everyone's got a chance to watch it and check it out. But yeah, this is a great film. I learned a lot about it through our guest uh, who's with us today, Dr. Onalee McGraw from Port Royal, Virginia. Did I get that right?
Front Royal. Yeah.
Front
Front
Royal,
Royal.
Virginia. Okay.
Yeah.
And she has been studying classic films since they were new in theaters. Okay, so before some of you got here, she was talking about going to see It's a Wonderful Life when it was a new release in theaters as a little girl, and I just think that's so amazing. And so her, you just enjoyed movies your whole life, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah.
So
It's a
anyway,
lifelong obsession.
she is just a treat. You're going to really enjoy hearing from her. She's here to facilitate a conversation amongst ourselves, too. So, through this movie, it brings up a lot of issues that we're still facing even today. But she's got a unique perspective just because she's seen a lot in her lifetime, for a lot of films, but also been involved in a lot of things. She was it as a college student when she was your age. As a college student, she was involved in the civil rights movement that we've spent some time studying in our class this semester. But you were actually there. You have a word or two to tell us about that? Maybe just a moment. What was that
Well,
like?
thank you, Bill. I was my regular college was Whittier College in Southern California. And they were way ahead of their time in the late 50s. If you think about the Quaker heritage and the abolition of the slave trade in England was really led by the Quakers. And Whittier was like that. And we had an exchange program with Howard University and with Fisk University. And Fisk was in Tennessee, and Howard was in Washington, D.C. And I went as an exchange student to Howard University in the spring semester of 1960. And my best friend, Leslie Green, she went as an exchange student to Fisk University in Tennessee. And so, would you believe, if you've all heard or studied about the lunch counter sit ins, Leslie was part of that in Nashville. And there was a wonderful young woman named Diane Nash from Chicago. And Diane was really the one who came up with the idea of the lunch counter sit ins. She was a senior at Fisk. And so all this was going on, and they just went down to the hamburger stand, the diner, and they just sat there. And that's part of, we'll talk about that a little more with when we discuss Raisin in the Sun next
Okay.
week,
All right.
because that's much more timely. But I was able to actually sit in the Rankin Chapel at Howard University and hear Martin Luther King say to all of us, I was one of about 12 white students at this all Black university. And he said, you guys have got to really join in solidarity with your brothers and sisters down in Nashville. They're putting their lives on the line. And about 3 days after that, a few of the students took up Martin Luther King's challenge, and they chartered a small bus. And I was crossing the square, and they said, hey, Onalee, do you have the guts to get on this bus? And there were about 15 of them already on. And I said, yes. And I just jumped on the bus. But it really was, as I've said in commentaries on this, it was because they were my friends and I knew them and I felt comfortable going. You know, the students who called out to me were not people I didn't know. And when we talk about Richard Widmark and Sidney Poitier, in No Way Out, this will come through again, how important friendship really is to overcoming these racial divides. So anyway, I'm proud to say I was part of the very first little civil rights march right around the Eisenhower White House of that year, which was the spring of 1960. And there were about 15 of us, and we had our signs, and we just marched around in front of the White House, and then we got back on the bus, and that was it.
But
no headlines or protests or anything, just a small group of kids. But they did take up Martin Luther King's challenge, because he was saying to them, you know, your brothers and sisters down there in Nashville are putting their lives on the line. And they were. So the first thing that I say here, I use the word breakthrough, because this was the very first film of the Golden Age era where the screenwriter and director, Joseph Mankiewicz, he both wrote the screenplay and directed. He was brilliant that way. Very few of the great directors could do both, could write and direct, but he could. And that's very important for how you see the film and how it played out, especially in terms of character study. And so as we go through this, the key to it of his breakthrough was that these characters, as African Americans, were portrayed as whole persons, full dimensional whole persons. And that's why we can say No Way Out is one of the very foremost films that help us take us from me to we in the art of classic films, transcending these divisions that are fragmenting and dividing us today so severely.
I'll just jump in there a second then with a question or a comment. So you talked about African Americans, whole characters. So they were portrayed in film before this. This is the first time they got leading roles and
yes.
Okay. I don't know if you're aware of it. I'm just aware of it because I study this kind of stuff about my own state. Hattie McDaniel, the first Oscar winner, African American, was from Kansas, and she was the maid, I think, in Gone with the Wind. Her character was not as, I mean, it was an important character, but it wasn't.
Right. It was a vital character, but it was still a supporting character.
Right, right.
And this was designed, even though this was Sidney Poitier's very first film, and he has a supporting role, he's not given star billing, but it's very clear from the screenplay, isn't it, that he's the protagonist, he's the hero. And this had never been done before. So I just have very quickly for you the learning outcomes. We can just get by that quickly, but it's to show that I did take your learning objectives, and it's very important what your university is trying to do. And then believing very strongly that watching and discussing classic films like No Way Out really is one of the most effective and compelling ways to develop wisdom about human nature in general, and then also to have a greater, deeper, more richer understanding of diversity and cultural awareness in particular. So I want you to see and share, since you've all seen the movie, these men hate each other in the film, but this was the beginning of a lifelong friendship between these two men. And I think you'll really enjoy seeing them years later.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Richard Widmark. Very happy to see you where you are tonight, Sid. Lasting friendships are not the norm in this business. When I met Sidney in 1949, we were making a picture called No Way Out, the Joe Mankiewicz No Way Out. And it was Sidney's first picture. I played a horrible racist bigot. And I had to say and do just vicious things to Sidney. So practically after every take, I'd run up to him and I'd apologize. And I'd try to assure him, Sid, it's just the character talking, not me. Well, he was very understanding. We became good friends. I've watched with great admiration the young fella I met so long ago develop into a brilliant actor, director, and writer, and who's lent dignity to our profession and has become a man we all admire. Thanks, Sid. Thanks very much for letting me be your friend.
You can just see how much that meant to him just in that moment.
He was such a young man, and I think he was only about 22, and Richard Widmark invited him to come to dinner. And that was just the kind of person Richard Widmark was. He was stuck playing villains most of his career, and he really didn't want to play this part. But Joe Mankiewicz and studio head Darryl Zanuck convinced him that great good could come about, which was definitely true, if he would be willing to play this psychopathic racist. And he had played other villains and he didn't want to be typecast. So he really sacrificed to play this part. And Sidney Poitier was just a young man, and he invited him to come to his home, and they became lifelong friends, as you see there. And this slide here talks about the human dignity, the universal concept of human dignity, and is the major theme that we can think about. And especially, I want to call your attention to the last scene in the film. And the whole idea of universal human dignity is what makes so much sense to all of us. We know that we are all members of the human race. And so we can talk about that later, but please be making notes to yourself and thinking how, through the brilliance of this great screenwriter, director, Joseph Mankiewicz, this difficult concept of human dignity is realized in the last scene, with the person in the victim class actually being the giver of that dignity to the racist. So this is a very important beginning scene that I actually didn't really pick up on myself until I watched the movie again with the great expertise of Turner Classic Movies host Eddie Muller. And we can talk about this. There are two very definite views of life that you see presented by these two men on this elevator. One of them, I would say, is a view that says there's really nothing you can do when things are evil and bad and injustice is happening, bad things are happening. It's just really how it is. It's always going to be this way. And Sidney Poitier is saying something different. His character is saying something different, isn't it? So you can think about that. Yes? the classic movies that really are successful over the years are those that really do affirm there's something we can do about this. We can make a moral decision. We may have a bad situation, but something can be done. And that's what his character's saying. This also was something that I picked up late in the game. It shows you that it's really helpful to have somebody studying something and have it pointed out to you. Joe Mankiewicz, if you recall, and it might have passed you by, it certainly passed me by. These two white cops in this particular scene are completely stereotypical characters. And so what Joe Mankiewicz was doing there in this screenplay was to create the opposite to what Black actors had to do. They had to be in stereotypical roles up to that point. And this is a movie about race relations. And so the cops are these kind of superficial characters, as Black actors had been in previous films. Okay. The other important concept that I was just thinking about most recently is the idea of cancer as the word to describe racial hatred, or really any kind of hatred. It grows, it festers, and this scene is a very important scene because you are seeing the ability of the character of Ray Biddle to manipulate, and he puts the needle into Sidney Poitier's pocket and creates confusion for him and uncertainty. And here he is, a Black doctor just starting out, having to perform medical treatment on this brother of Ray Biddle and then on him. So it's very challenging for him, and Ray Biddle is very clever the way that he does this. So it shows this evil way that this kind of hatred grows and festers and becomes more terrible as time goes on. Then this just briefly is the title itself is There Is No Way Out for Him Except the Autopsy. And this is the thrust of the film, is what can he do to get that autopsy? There's otherwise no way out for him. Okay. This is a very important scene. These two people, Richard Widmark and Linda Darnell, were veteran great stars at 20th Century Fox when this movie was made. And their skills are really being tested as actors here. And he uses all his wiles as the character of Ray Biddle to make her do evil things when she is not by nature an evil or negative person. Yes, she's grown up in Beaver Canal, but her inclinations are not to the bad side. But he is able to manipulate her and work against her better human nature. And she says it here, you don't get out of Beaver Canal because it never gets out of you. But what is happening, as you all remember, in the tremendously tragic scene where all this violence takes place, is that Edie is very well aware that she's right in the middle of that and that she has played the major role to bring that about. because she's been the source of communication. So you see on her face, you see this complex combination of guilt and horror, and all these things are registered on her face. And this is one of the things I love about the movies of Joe Mankiewicz, because he wrote this script to show her in this position, and then he's directing the actress to fulfill the concepts that he's put on paper. This, of course, is a key scene that you can talk about later. And this is probably one of the most important scenes, because it shows how people very different from one another. And of course, at first, Edie doesn't even want Gladys to touch her. But once they start to talk, and they talk about human nature, they talk about human beings, and Gladys is kind of the wiser of the two. She knows human nature. And of course, you all know what the upshot of this is that Edie comes to see, yes, there are good and bad people who are of my race, and there are good and bad people of another race. And then this scene coming up here that you see is very key for Edie's change in character, because she's hearing for the first time that Dr. Brooks is going to have to take this action. And of course, she has been a key person that caused the things to go wrong. First of all, refusing to cooperate in any way for him to get the autopsy. And secondly, being the carrier of information for Ray Biddle to cause the race riot. But now she's looking at this woman and seeing how she is presenting what her husband is going to do. And then you can also think about the brilliance of Joe Mankiewicz, the screenwriter, because we are not seeing Dr. Brooks do those things. That's kind of boring anyway. He would be going down to the police station, turning himself in, and so forth. But what you do see is how he has found his way out through the eyes of Edie, looking at this woman as a whole person who is the wife of Dr. Luther Brooks.
So I want to pause you there a second. So those of you that might happen to be studying digital media or storytelling, that's a wonderful example of powerful storytelling that we're missing nowadays in a lot of the films. It's all just shoot 'em up and explosions and computer graphics and that, but that he respects his audience. He doesn't have to show the doctor giving himself up. He uses the wife to tell that part, and like you said, it's more powerful that way. But that really shows a lot of respect to the audience to be able to watch that and come to their own conclusions about things.
Very profound. That's what the audience is supposed to do in classical drama.
Yeah, in great stories, the audience is supposed to be involved. You're not supposed to have a passive role. You're supposed to actually be trying to figure out what's going to happen next, and feel empathy for the characters, and all of those things are supposed to happen, but they don't always happen with our current films.
That's exactly right. So then this is, as you recall, this is a very satisfying scene where, and Edie is, of course, seeing all of this taking place, where a good thing is happening in society and in community and in the institutions here of law enforcement, and something orderly and good is happening here. and she's seeing how that all fits together. This is very different from the life that she's experienced in Beaver Canal. So I love this scene, because, as you know, Joe Mankiewicz created the third brother as a deaf mute. And that's crucial. When you see the film, you may have to see it again, or you may remember that this brother is the one sitting in the hall when Sidney Poitier's character comes out and he says, I didn't kill him. He didn't die because of my treatment, but something's amiss. And that brother has seen that. He can read lips. Then he's told Ray Biddle all about it. And that's how it all gets started. The whole story gets started. So then it's rather brilliant the way Mankiewicz has Edie's escape taking place, because she can turn up the radio, and George, I think his name is George, can't hear the radio. And so she's able to escape to help Dr. Brooks. And this is this incredible scene where Sidney Poitier, just think of him as a brand new young man acting for the very first time and having to play a protagonist in his very first movie role, the young Black actor. And so he's able to say the words that we can apply in any situation that we're experiencing today. I can't kill a man just because he hates me. There's something, I have a moral responsibility. Isn't this amazing? Joe Mankiewicz is creating characters that a Black man that's been so harmed is saying, I have a moral responsibility to this man to heal his bleeding leg. 2 short years after I was an exchange student to Howard University, was the March on Washington. That was 1963. And here you see Sidney Poitier, who was by that time a great star. He has gone from this brand new role that he had in 1950 to really paving the way for many, many Black actors that followed him. And he's with Harry Belafonte, who was another breakthrough performer of that time, and Charlton Heston, leading man of the day. And they are at the March for Washington. And it's a way we can say, I was so much of that time. I was a young woman in my early 20s when this all took place. And the sensibilities of that time, of the early civil rights movement, was very much a recovery of the truth that we share a common humanity. It was just the complete spirit of the time. And when whites and Blacks could join each other, it was something that elevated all of us, and was, to me, really the key to the whole way that it was really broke through at that time in the early 60s.
So can I
Yes.
go back a slide? Yeah. So you're asking if we can rebuild a national moral community, and I saw something in the handout. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to look at that yet. The link was on the download page for, but you talked about moral capital and moral communities. Can you explain what you mean by that? What does it mean to be a moral community or moral capital? What are you talking about?
To have moral capital, social capital. This is concepts that have been developed by 2 wonderful scholars that I cannot recommend them highly enough to you. The first one who came up with this was a Harvard political scientist named Robert Putnam. And he wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And he used that very catchy title to talk about the fact that America was losing its sense of living in community, having a shared life, a shared common life. And he talks a lot about civic associations and different fraternal organizations in community and so forth. And another scholar that has written about this that is so vitally important is Jonathan Haidt, who is a moral psychologist and a neurological scientist. And he has written a book called The Righteous Mind.
Was that on the next slide?
And that's coming up. And
okay.
So what they mean by this, what is meant by it is it's a form of extra resource that we need to work things together in community. And this resource is all at once social, moral, and cultural. It has to have all three of those dimensions so that it's really speaking to the most basic way that human beings are, that we have a wanting to have a home, wanting to live with each other. And there are so many things that you have to do with each other. The cooperation, the putting up with people, and then the building of the institutions. So what Jonathan Haidt did was come up with these moral foundations, pillars, and that's what I wanted to share with you so much, because this film just cries out for that kind of an analysis of the different moral foundations that must be built up, must be repaired, must be strengthened for us to get along together in civil society. Did I answer your question, Bill, do you think?
I think so. And I point out to students that are in my class that we're going to be doing a paper project related to these films that Dr. McGraw's given you two good references that you can include right on there if you can get a hold of them. This book, The Righteous Mind, and also the Bowling Alone book, which I have in my office if anyone wants to look at that. I'm going to try to get a hold of this one too in the very near future. But
we all need to see that as probably one of the most important things that we can possibly do, is rebuild community and moral capital wherever we are. And that's why these movies can be such a great way to get started. It's not like we're all going to start singing Kumbaya, right? We watch this movie and then we go,
that's what I was going
Kumbaya. But we can begin to see, even just seeing what Joseph Mankiewicz was trying to do. I mean, here he was, right in the middle of a classic movie era where Blacks had simply been stereotypical characters. Well, what if he'd said, well, I don't need to try this. This is too hard. But he didn't. He tried it, and actually the movie didn't do that well in the South. And it didn't do that well in kind of more like rural communities or small towns, because it was very revolutionary. It was very different, but it did do quite well in the urban cities of the day. Okay, good. So again, this I'm using this image again to talk about Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory. And he names 6 different moral foundations, and we can't go into that now, but the major one that he has uncovered is that all human beings have an innate sense of wanting others and themselves to have care versus harm. And so when they do these studies, there's this instinctive thing in human beings and even in animals, but especially in human beings, that there is this impulse to care, to rescue, to bring the good, the protection. And so I use this just as this one example to introduce you to Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory. We have to do things. We can't just have lectures on how important it is for us not to be racist or something like that. We have to be able to practice, to be able to learn again a lot of these things that Robert Putnam says we automatically knew back in the old days. What does Edie do in the final scene that points the way to our sense of the universal nature of human dignity? What is the thing that Dr. Brooks asks her to actually do that helps her to be an acting person?
When he asked her to use her scarf as a tourniquet.
Yeah.
Good for you. This is great. That I didn't even see it the first time or the third time.
Exactly.
Well, it was a good way to get her involved. She became hands-on at that point.
She wanted him to die, and no, give me your scarf. That's a genius move on the writer's part and on the doctor's part, the character's part.
Yes, great. Okay, next one. And then would anyone like to talk about that conversation between Edie and Gladys?
Any comments?
Weren't they talking about, wasn't Edie talking about her father?
Is that how they got her to warm up?
He kind of get a little background information. I mean, it seemed like a pretty informal conversation between the two. Gladys she was talking about split pea soup, or I think that was the dish. So, I mean, they were just kind of going back and forth without any angst or anything towards each other. It was more at a human level than black versus white.
Has anyone ever had a conversation like that surprised you? Like you didn't think it was going to go anywhere. You didn't think you were going to like that person. And then it turned out that person was actually kind of neat.
The change I saw in Edie was when she asked the question, what do you do on your day off, Gladys? Because now it's about Gladys's life, not Gladys the servant or maid to the Dr. Wharton, but what's your life? What do you do on your day off?
What natural human virtues must Dr. Brooks practice to find that exit when there is no way out? And that's a good one. And then the next question too gets to applications for today. But can anybody say what in particular are the virtues, what we call everybody's thought of what is good? What is it? What are the good things that he does? Think about the moment when he's trying to take care of people after the race riot. What happens there that causes him to really be resolved, what he has to do? Does anybody remember that?
I thought great. It was just another example of how the community saw Blacks at the time. A lot of people, the older woman said, "Get your black hands off my son." And it was just like, she should be happy that he's getting care. Like, it's a crazy scene, chaotic. So it's just like how they didn't see them as members of the community doing their job, you know.
That's right. So it's kind of I think of it as a virtue of prudence that he had to practice. He had to really be very realistic about what his situation was. And at that moment, he really knew how much trouble he was in.
I don't think there wasn't much content in this film that really isn't relevant today. I mean, you kind of look at the political climate and everything else that's happening. It's crazy. It's almost identical in the film as it is to the current day situation. There's so much of it that you can apply to what's happening today, just in the lessons to be learned.
Well, what top lesson would you say that we've talked about tonight, or one that you picked up on that you personally could use, you think?
I would say based on the evaluation of Edie's character, just humanity, showing that everybody's equal, that you don't believe anybody to be any different fundamentally or better than another.
Okay. Seeing the value of each human just because they are a human.
Yeah.
I think tagging on to that, Jeremy, is how can I connect with somebody who thinks or believes differently than me, so that I can see their humanity, so that I can find their humanity? Because if I find them offensive and I don't connect with them, then I won't ever try to see the human behind that.
That's the friendship thing.
I had the privilege about 12 years ago of teaching in an after-school program at a nearby public high school, and we studied No Way Out during Black History Month. So it was very, very rewarding, and from a lot of that, I developed this whole study guide that really can be used for young adults, high school, whatever, college students.
All right, we'll look at that. Thank you, Dr. McGraw. Applause doesn't really work that well on Zoom, but I mean, we can try it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's great to be with you guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. You've
Hey,
given
Bill,
us...
before we sign off, is there anyone that didn't say something that has a thought or a final?
Yeah.
I did a general comment about older movies. I love to watch old classic movies.
Yeah.
And nowadays everything moves really fast in movies, and there's a lot of action, and we kind of get used to that. And you start watching one of these older movies and everything moves slow, but it's expecting you to be thinking. It's the character development is so key to the story, and you have to sit back and you have to pay attention, and you need to be critically thinking about it as you're watching it to really appreciate what's happening in the movie.
Thank you all for coming tonight. This is, to me, this is what college is about. It's not just what we do in the classroom, but these side things that we do that you take a special interest in and spend a little bit of time. We're lucky to have the technology. We can bring an expert in like Dr. McGraw and be with you tonight. And
Monday night's the next showing, and
Monday night will be the next film. We're planning on doing it again in the conference room at the college, and then Wednesday we'll meet a week from tonight and talk about A Raisin in the Sun. So, all right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good night.
Thanks everyone.
Monday,
Good night.
to say
Thank you.